Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, the Munich Security Conference is winding up. So, if you were lucky to go, you would have by now you would have been wined and dined handsomely.
He propagandized.
If you propagandized, you would have been drinking excellent beer from one of those beer steins. And you would be thinking, well, when's the next one going to come around? Because you're already missing it. But
Maybe
anyway,
make it a biannual event. Okay.
that's right. And there are a number of striking features of this. This event seemed more unhinged than previous events. The unhinging, I think, came from the Europeans, where they're just completely off their heads, Russia and Ukraine. The Americans, they were obviously led by Secretary of State Rubio, and while the Europeans were happy that this was that his speech was not quite as acerbic and aggressive as J.D. Vance's speech last year, nonetheless they weren't very happy with it because he still pointed out that there are real differences between the United States and Europe, despite the common bonds and so on. And Ukraine, which is what the Europeans just want to talk about, really was only mentioned once in his address, and only in the context of, hey, we're doing so much to bring Russia and Ukraine together. And indeed, there was no denunciations of Russia, just simply descriptions. Oh, we're trying to work out a deal on Ukraine. So they were not happy, but at least they didn't get the tongue lashing that they got last year from Vance, and so they pretended they were very happy with Rubio's speech. There was a very noticeable delegation of Democrats. And you can see here, this is where the Munich security people are cultivating the Democratic opposition. So AOC was there, so this was her coming out party as a foreign policy expert.
And how did that work out? Oh my God.
Right. So I think people should take a look at Glenn Greenwald's short video of him.
Masterful short. Masterful.
Yes. But Gretchen Whitmer was also there, and she also demonstrated no great acumen when it comes to foreign policy. Interestingly enough, Hillary Clinton was there, even though it's 13 years since she was actually Secretary of State. But I guess they figure that maybe she will come back, and stranger things have happened. She could come back.
Well, I think mistakenly they still think the Clinton machine has some juice. Okay.
Well,
And anyway, and Hillary is always, you can always count on her to poison the atmosphere. Okay. So yeah, she always has a role. Yeah.
yeah, but even if she doesn't get appointed Secretary of State, that's nothing unlikely, or that she's not going to be on the ticket or anything like that. She could always get some kind of an appointment. You can always set up a commission to look into something, or she can be a negotiator or whatever. Like Kissinger, would always, he'd be on hand to head up something or other. Long after his years.
Well, she could head up a blue ribbon panel on
Yeah,
incarcerating Donald Trump. She would love that.
that's right. And of course, she was indeed very poisonous. And she revived the good old Trump-Russia collusion story, and where again the thesis was somehow Trump was betraying Ukraine, Trump was working with Putin. This is a sort of the dumbest, worst kind of Democrat, liberal
Yeah,
meme
and
that
see
somehow
how
Trump
did that
isn't doing
help?
enough for Ukraine.
How did that help the Democratic Party?
Yes, not very well. She was there. Now, the the striking thing was, of course, the vehemence that was coming from the Europeans, and the thrust of what they were saying, this was the thrust of what the Democrats were saying. We are with Zelensky. We absolutely wholeheartedly, fulsomely support Zelensky. We're going to keep providing him with money, weapons, whatever he needs, as long as he refuses to come to any kind of an agreement, which is what they were trying to say. So, in other words, Rubio comes in and saying, "Well, we're trying to negotiate something," and the Europeans are saying, "No, no, don't do that. Don't make any concessions. We just want to keep this war going." And Zelensky happily says, "Yeah, I'm not going to make any concessions." So that was
Well,
the message of Munich.
talk about the Logan Act, I mean, really,
Yeah,
really.
yeah, yeah. Now, the most belligerent was Chancellor Schmerz, who talked about making the Bundeswehr the strongest army in Europe. And so here was his speech, and you can see here that where he talks about our capabilities, we're far from having fully exploited it, and then he kind of goes on, and then he quotes here 15 years ago Radek Sikorsky. He quotes Radek Sikorsky, not exactly a scholar, and
Reputable. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, the foreign, Anne Applebaum's husband. So 15 years ago, Radek Sikorsky wrote a cautionary tale for Germany, and I may quote him: "I fear German inaction more than German power. This too is part of our responsibility." So everyone's going to get very excited. Oh, this is great. We're going to have German action because that's all we're craving, German action in Europe. And then so and then he goes on. Great power
Oh,
politics.
we accept this responsibility.
Yes,
Huh.
that's
So
right.
what was the first major act of the unified Germany, George? You're the best
That's
to
right.
tell the
Made
story.
first act, which was to recognize the secession of Croatia and Slovenia. A very, that's basically it's the act to destroy a really existing um, member state of the United Nations. That was
So
Germany's first.
that's um, uh, the starter on the starter
That's right,
menu.
exactly. The
Okay.
moment the moment they got
What
their
can you do
unification.
now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And then partnership-based leadership, yes. Hegemonic fantasies, no. And then he says, this is what's kind of interesting. He says, we Germans will never again go it alone. This is the lasting lesson from our history. We assert our freedom with our neighbors, only with our neighbors, our allies, and our partners. So he's basically saying, well, where we made our mistake, we went alone. No, what we're going to do now is we're going to be surrounded by partners. And since if we're talking about Europe, he wants to basically dominating Europe. These will be essentially states that are subordinate to us. So we Germans will never go it alone, but we'll pursue the same policies. It's just that we're not going
Yes,
to do it alone.
but Germany didn't do it alone. Okay. That's the whole
Exactly.
point.
Germany did not do it
That's the
alone.
whole point.
That's
They
it.
didn't do
They
it
did
alone.
not do exactly. That's always
I,
forgotten. Yeah, yeah.
you know, I don't want to sound too repetitive here, but it's always important to remember that when Europe, using the language of Mediterranean, we will never do it alone. Well, Napoleon didn't do it alone.
Exactly.
Hitler didn't do it alone.
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
and and let's be very serious and sober about this. The Russians are always worried about that, always very worried. Because when Europe is united in the way that Merz is suggesting here, Russia's the first target.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And Merz isn't making any secret of that, as though that Russia is the first target. Um, and then he goes on. First, we are strengthening ourselves militarily, politically, economically, and technologically. This reduces our dependencies and our vulnerabilities. Our highest priority is to strengthen Europe within NATO. We are investing heavily in credible deterrence. And then we support Ukraine in its courageous resistance against Russian imperialism. Now, the moment you have Germans start talking about with supporting Ukraine against Russian imperialism, you right away start thinking about, well, we have heard this kind of talk before, and Merz is now making this a real point of always talking about this Russian imperialism. This is that we are fighting Russian imperialism. All of it is wonderfully reminiscent of past bluster from Berlin. Um, and because they're now united with a whole bunch of other states, Merz thinks that he can just do this without anyone really expressing any anxiety. That's why he quotes Radek Sikorski. Well, Sikorski said, hey, I worry about Germany in action more than I worry about German action. Incidentally, Germany and Europe have been providing crucial leadership here for the past year. We have imposed unforeseen losses and costs on Moscow. So that's Germany. We have and Europe have imposed unforeseen losses and costs on Moscow. If Moscow finally agrees to peace, it will be partly because of this. This is an expression of European self-assertion. And then we are
No,
strengthening.
well, it's an expression of European weakness and lack of foresight to allow the security situation in Europe to deteriorate to where it was, and thus the resulting special military operation. This is all completely turned upside
Well,
down.
of course it is. But this is the point, and we've said that we said
Oh,
this on.
in the eastern flank. Again, we're using military
Yeah,
terms.
that's right, exactly. But as we said on Friday, the striking things about the this Munich Security Conference is if you're talking about European security, the most obvious thing you need to have is you bring on the Russians and debate this with the Russians as to, well, what are the security problems? How can we resolve the security issues in Europe? They don't want to do this.
They don't want to resolve
They
them.
don't want
That's
to
the
resolve it, and that's the most striking, feature of this security conference. The last thing they want is resolution of this. I mean, you're listening to Merz. This is not someone who's thinking about, hey, let's bring peace. Let's end this war. This war is a bad idea. It's a disaster. He doesn't even do the minimum that Trump does. Trump every time he brings up the subject, he talks about how many people are dying. He talks about how many people are dying. We need to bring this thing to an end. So many people are dying. Oh, over and over again, Trump says this. Merz, Starmer, the rest, they never bring that up. All they want to talk about is, hey, how can we keep this going for some time?
George, everyone's allowed to interpret what they read, and my gut tells me he wants another shot at it.
I think so. But and this is one's always had the suspicion about the Germans is, well, we're not going to make the same mistakes that Hitler made. We know the mistakes he made. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that again. Obviously, one big mistake. You don't want to take on the world Jewry. I mean, that's a bad idea. You don't want to antagonize the Jews. They're powerful people. They have they have lots of money, the media, and so on. We're not going to make that mistake, which is why Germany has gone out of its way. The one power in Europe has gone out of its way unconditionally to support Israel. And
And
so,
Germany will avoid excesses.
yes,
So
excesses.
Hitler was excessive.
That's
Okay,
right.
and that is the new interpretation, according to the current German political elite,
Yeah,
is that excesses and mistakes were made. That is a terrifying
right.
interpretation of history.
Yes, yes.
It's
And
just,
we'll make we'll at least pretend that we're taking into consideration our allies' views. So we're going to go through the pretense because notoriously, remember when um, during World War II, when Stepan Bandera declared Ukraine as an independent state, this infuriated Hitler because that wasn't really part of the plan. I mean, Ukraine was just going to be used by Hitler as waging its war. So then, he imprisoned Bandera, though he made use of Bandera's people as auxiliaries in his war in Ukraine. But he had no intention of actually creating an independent Ukrainian state, or at least not until the war was won. But so here, at least they pretend, oh, we support Ukraine, we support an independent Ukraine. We're not going to do what Hitler did. You know, Hitler did not support independent Ukraine. So it's just like we're not going to make the same mistakes again.
Well, no, speaking about an independent sovereign Ukraine is a tool for another plan, and that is to destroy
Well,
Russia.
that's that's that's
That's
that's right. That's exactly that's what they. So they, but I mean, Hitler just didn't even want to create that because for him, we had to win the war. I mean, he was basically said we got to win this war. Then we can talk about how how these creating these states. Bandera just went ahead and declared it without clearing it with Hitler first,
yeah.
and that's why he imprisoned Bandera. Um, but but
It's
but here they're pretending that we actually do support this independent Ukraine.
but see, again, if history is our guide, and I think we should, because that history is not that far away here. So if the ruling principle of the German political elite now is to take on Russia, they're going to coerce all of Germany is going to coerce all of its neighbors and further
Right,
afar
right,
toward that goal.
right.
So, a political party in Romania or a politician in Romania we don't like because he's not on board for this. That is reason enough to thwart their democratic process for the
That's
greater good, George,
the
the
for the
greater
greater good.
good.
No, absolutely. That is the plan, and that's why. And as the speech goes on, it Merz makes clear the last thing we're interested in is democracy. We're not going to have any in a democracy at all in Europe. I mean, so we're going to put in
Oh,
all sorts of limitations because otherwise they're going to be, politicians emerging saying, we don't want to go down this path, include us out, as happened in Romania and so on. So yeah, this is what he says. Well, we have to keep a control of democracy. We can't just simply have, people voting
well, it's
whatever they
interesting
want.
here. We will, again, I'm not sure who we is. We Germans, I suppose, or we will ensure greater security in the far north. See, again, this is an echo of a very troubling
Yeah,
past. That Germany isn't in the north, okay?
that's
So
right.
it will have its satellites in the north.
Yes,
And don't you just love this, George? The first German Eurofighters.
Eurofighters. Yeah,
That's just perfect. It just says everything.
right, right.
It's they're not because if it was just Euro, NATO, it'd be Eurofighters. But no, they're German.
That's right.
German first,
That's right. That's
second
right.
they're Euro.
Yeah. Anyway, he goes on, we will, and I have often said it before, make the Bundeswehr the strongest conventional army in Europe as quickly as possible. And that's really very exciting. There's nothing
Okay,
more, there's nothing.
everybody. Okay, make it the strongest conventional army in Europe. So what is Europe? Germany, or get ready for stationing of German troops in Hungary, in Romania,
Right.
in Poland, in the Baltic states. Is
Right.
that that's how I read it?
No, I think that's right. And then at the same time, we are making our society and our economy more resilient. It's always very inspiring when somebody says we're making our society more resilient. Oh, well, that's good. What are you doing to make it more resilient? We are
Um, cens
introducing we That's right.
censorship.
Exactly.
Uh,
We are introducing new laws to harden our networks and critical infrastructure against hybrid attacks. Now, this hybrid attacks does indeed involve information. We can't have ourselves under attack from information that's inspired by Russia. But how do you know it's inspired by Russia? Well, obviously they're just repeating Russian talking points, so therefore it's inspired by Russia, and therefore we have to harden the infrastructure. It always sounds better actually in German when you use words like harden. We are forging resilient supply chains and reducing one-sided dependencies on raw materials, key products, and technologies. We are protecting our
There
free
was
and
a there was a regime in the middle of the 20th century that said we were forging resilient. I mean, this is like a carbon copy,
that's
George.
it, yeah. We are protecting our free and democratic order against its enemies. See, this
As we
is
shut down the most popular political party in Germany.
that's right, against its enemies. Always very chilling when they talk about our free and democratic order. So against its enemies. Who are these enemies? Well, I'm assuming it's the Alternative for Deutschland party, the most popular party in Germany, both internal and external. Look at we are protecting it. It's always good. We're protecting. We abolish freedom and democracy in order to save freedom and democracy.
Democracy.
Among other things, we will strengthen our intelligence services. I have no doubt that that's the plan that we're strengthening. I mean, imagine saying all of this. You're sitting in there and everyone is applauding. Oh, this is fantastic. Great. We're strengthening our intelligence services, our internal intelligence services.
They just won't call it the Gestapo. That's
That's
all.
right. And then he goes on, secondly, we are strengthening Europe. A sovereign Europe is our best answer to the new era. Uniting and strengthening Europe is our most important task today.
There is no such thing as a sovereign Europe. Stop doing this.
That's right. That's it.
Stop doing this.
Yeah.
It just rolls off the tongue.
That's right.
But think about what that means.
You mean
Then
exactly?
who controls the sovereignty?
That's right.
You?
That's right. But this is a
This is a cover for a country like Germany to subdue the sovereignty of other constituent
that's
members
right.
of NATO.
That's right. And the one who's going to execute this, implementing this plan, is of course Ursula von der Leyen. Completely undemocratic, totally undemocratic, and they intend to impose their will on everyone else. There's really little democratic accountability in all of this. That's really what the message that's being put forward here at this security conference. We're just going to go ahead and do this, and no one's going to stop us because if you're trying to stop us, then you're obviously one of the internal or external
Enemy.
enemies.
If you're going to have, if you're going to have something, European sovereignty, that means you cannot have democracy within the EU.
No, no,
You can't have both.
no, you can't. That's right. Dear Ursula von der Leyen, we discussed these issues.
I guess it sounds better in German.
I think
Okay.
um, and then he talks about Europe must become a global political force with its own security strategy. And then as a reminder, and also for those who may not know, Article 42 of the Treaty of the European Union commits us to assist one another in the event of an armed attack in Europe. We now need to spell out how we intend to organize this at the European level, not as the replacement for NATO, but as a self-sustaining, strong pillar within the alliance. And you know, and that's right. But you see, what the interesting thing is, they have these security conferences, and there's never any dissenting voice. There's no one who's going to say, I don't really like where all of this is going. I think this is all a very, very dangerous path. It can't possibly end well, either just in terms of whether you can avoid a war, but it can't end well just in terms of democracy. I mean, you're basically talking about essentially step-by-step abolition of democracy. And then he says, I've begun initial talks with French President Emmanuel Macron on European nuclear deterrence. So that's the whole,
Okay.
yeah.
That's okay. This alarm should be going off right now.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. I really want to understand the circumstances in which the French will give the Germans equal control, mutual control, co-control. I don't know what word it will be of their nuclear deterrent. That is a scary place. That
It,
is a
it is
very
really, yes, it is because that was the whole point of the French nuclear deterrent was that you can only use it. The one thing you can time circumstance in which you can use it is in defense of France. If it's an existential, France is under existential threat. but only defense of France, with no other circumstance. It had nothing to do with NATO. It was only not they didn't even share it with the British. It was only for France. So if you start talking about extending this to Germany jointly with Germany, then that's a complete violation. Then you'd have to think: are the French going to put up with this? I mean, you're essentially throwing aside 6 decades of French foreign policy.
Well, and then you're making Germany a nuclear power.
You're making Germany nuclear power, exactly. And then thirdly, we want to establish a new transatlantic partnership. And then let me begin with the uncomfortable truth. A chasm, a deep divide has opened up between Europe and the United States of America. Vice President Vance said this here in Munich a year ago. He was right in his description. And then the culture war waged by the MAGA movement in the USA is not ours. No, well, obviously we don't, we don't want anything. I mean, when they talk about this MAGA movement, they don't really know what MAGA movement is. But what they sense about MAGA is its populism. It's somehow, basically presidents need to be accountable to the people rather than just to the elites, and particularly the national security establishments. That's why he says it's not ours. we don't do this. And then here it is. Freedom of speech ends here when it infringes upon human dignity and the Constitution. Well, that's interesting. I mean, it impinges on human dignity. Well, I suppose if you say something mean about to someone, that you don't like it, and Merz has a pretty thin skin, then that's impinging on his human dignity. So that
You cannot
I
you
could
cannot have
cancel that.
you cannot have human dignity without freedom of speech. He's got it inverted.
That's right. But the point about freedom of speech is that it's always going to hurt somebody. That's the whole point. It's always going to hurt
Yeah,
somebody's feelings.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And everyone, my feelings and George's feelings are offended every single day when we read the
every
news.
single day, and it tiresome to repeat it. But the point about free speech is that it's free offensive speech. It's offensive speech, speech that people hate. That's the speech that needs to be protected. Popular speech doesn't need to be protected. Speech that everyone likes, it doesn't need protection. Everyone already likes it. That's the whole point of free speech. Clearly, he doesn't. He has no interest in this, and that's why he says, "Well, MAGA, that's nothing to do with us." And we don't believe in tariffs and protectionism. Yes, you do. Of course, Germany practices tariffs and protectionism. But in free trade, we stand by climate agreements and the World Health Organization because we are convinced that we can only solve global challenges together. And then with basically, but anyway, so that was Merz's rant. And then the interesting thing was also Keir Starmer that we talked a little bit earlier, and he was also quite. Let me just find where's the Keir Starmer, who is really quite becoming quite a chilling figure. Generally, the British are becoming quite chilling in Europe. So here was a little bit of the speech of Starmer, and here it says Russia has proved its appetite for aggression, bringing terrible suffering to the Ukrainian people. Its hyper threats extend across our continent. So they always use this hyper. I don't think he means hyper. I think he means hybrid. But because that's the buzzword, hybrid. There's a hyper threats that extend across our continents, not just threatening our security, but tearing at our social order.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Oh,
tearing
yeah.
at it,
Yeah.
collaborating with
They're
populists.
putting they're putting in the water. Yeah.
That's right. That's
There's
right.
Doctor Strangelove here.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's right. Collaborating. But you see, that's very interesting because at the time of Dr. Strangelove, that was made in what, 1964, he was portrayed, General Jack the Ripper, as off his rocker. Today, General Jack D. Ripper would be mainstream liberal opinion.
Very good point, George. Kubrick was so prescient
That's right.
on so many times.
Right.
Yes.
Um, Collaborating with populists, and the Russians are collaborating with populists to undermine our values. So the populists are undermining our values. You know, you think populists, what do populists do? Populists basically, they try to be popular. They try to cater to the wishes of the
Yeah.
voters.
Yeah, but you know, the popular. Okay, I don't want to get in the weeds here because now we're getting into semantics. But populists have values too, just not yours.
That's exactly. That's a very good point. Exactly. They have values. They're not your values. Using disinformation to sow division. You see, this is again.
Yeah,
This,
because you've lost the information war. That's why you whine about it.
yes, that's right. To sow division. I like the sow division. What do you do? He is one of the most divisive politicians around. I mean, this is a person. You were throwing people in prison for Facebook posts. You were celebrating the fact that people were being thrown into jail for no reason whatsoever. And you started ranting about, the hard, also the right wing thugs or whatever it was. You live for division. Oh, sowing division. Using cyber attacks and sabotage to disrupt our lives and deepening the cost of living crisis. Oh, so you aren't responsible for the cost of living
Oh,
crisis.
that's why. That's why that's where it comes from, the cost of living crisis. Oh, okay.
I
Russia did this.
suspect I suspect Putin was responsible for the Mandelson appointment as well. So yes, I
Oh,
think
come on, George. Don't, everybody knows that. Everyone
exactly
knows.
that's old news.
Old news. Okay.
um, NATO has warned that Russia could be ready to use military force against the alliance by the end of this decade.
It's
Uh,
really interesting. NATO is like a person here.
that's
NATO is
right.
warned.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
The collective wisdom of NATO.
Exactly. In the event of a peace deal in Ukraine, which we are all working hard to achieve, Russia's rearmament would only accelerate. Well, that doesn't make any lot of sense. I mean, just look at that sentence. In the event of a peace deal in Ukraine, which we are working hard to achieve, Russia's rearmament would only accelerate. Well, that means you don't want a peace deal. How can you say you want a peace deal we are working hard to achieve if you, as you say, the consequence will be Russia's rearmament? It sounds to me like you actually don't want a peace deal, and that's of course obvious. But that's why he said, well, we are all working. He has to put that in. We are working hard to achieve. Well, we want a peace deal. But Russia's rearmament will only accelerate. So you don't want a peace deal. That's it's obvious from what he just said. And that's true all from all of the speeches at Munich. And one should also say before we forget, Zelensky's very rude
Yeah.
intervention against Viktor Orban when he talked about how he's filling his belly instead of I don't know, protecting Hungary from the return of Russian forces. Kind of stupid thing to say to any Hungarian. But the filling his belly was that it sounds like fat shaming to me. Nonetheless, the audience, all good liberals, clapped, with great glee
Yeah.
at this kind of comment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Good liberals. You said it. They're good liberals.
Good
Okay.
liberals, and
They're good at practicing their vile ideology.
that's right. Um, the wider danger to Europe would not end there; it would increase. So it would increase. So the peace agreement. We don't want a peace agreement because it's only going to get worse for Europe. All right. Thank you for spelling that out. We must build a hard power because that is the currency of the age. We must be able to deter aggression. And yes, if necessary, we must be ready to fight. So, again, as with Schmerz, basically it's a call for war. It's just, we're just defending. Everything we're doing is defensive. Defensive. Well, we must be
Yeah,
ready.
well,
Yeah, we must be ready to
see,
fight.
Yeah, but see, NATO is a defensive alliance. Well, look at the definition of what defensive means. Okay, it means aggression.
Aggression, which is all that NATO has done. I mean, it's sort of like it's essentially um, to do whatever it takes to protect our people, our values, and our way of life. Like it's always every time somebody says in a smarmy way about values, you know perfectly well that's the last thing that they have in mind.
Yeah.
You know,
What values? What values does Starmer have with Peter Mandelson? What are those shared values?
what are the values? Um, one value would be, hey, how about the desirability of peace and a swift conclusion to a war that's wholly destructive? That would be a value. I mean, that's normally that's always from the oldest philosophers who has argued that the highest value is peace. You can read Saint Augustine. You went on and on, page after page. The highest value is peace. That doesn't seem like that's part of your equation. And sacrificing the lives of others, that doesn't seem like much of a value. It means putting away petty politics and short-term concerns. It means acting together to build a stronger Europe and a more European NATO, underpinned by deeper links between the UK and the EU. So
Yeah, that's his Brexit sentiment right there.
that's right,
Yeah.
exactly. So much for the again democracy the British had kind of voted for. Um, and then he goes on, and so and that's why I'm here today because I'm clear there is no British security without Europe and no European security without Britain.
Yeah,
Let's
but there's Britain in Europe, as he defines it, cannot have security if Russia doesn't have security.
but
You,
that's yeah yeah go on.
that's the no. See, this is the fundamental problem here. If you're denying security to Russia, you will be insecure.
Yeah yeah. But that's what they refuse
Well,
to.
he's talking a lot about Ukraine here, isn't he?
That's
Look,
right. Yeah. That, but that's the point. Everything that he's saying here is a guarantee for war. There's nothing here that would ensure peace. Because the moment you talk, about security guarantees for Ukraine and give Ukraine everything it wants, you are guaranteeing war. Because Russia is always going to feel threatened by that plan. And then when you talk about, well, we have to be ready for war by the end of the decade, that is only going to create greater alarm in Russia. And that's what so was awful about this Munich Security Conference. It's like they've learned nothing, they've forgotten nothing, they have no new ideas, no policy, no strategy, nothing. Hey, let's just continue as before because it's been such a great success.
and just hope Daddy isn't too angry with us.
That's yes. Um, and then it says, our militaries that once faced each other on the battlefield now stand side by side, pledged to each other's defense. Well, the Russians aren't standing side by side with you. You were kind of on the same side, weren't you? I mean, you're standing, so that our militaries. So in other words,
In both world wars.
that's right. So that's both World Wars. Yeah. So you've joined up with one bunch of Europeans to fight against your former allies. Well, that's a good program. And then he says, it is a shield over our heads every single day. And while some on the extremes of our politics chip away at this alliance, we defend it. So again, he talks about these extremes, as did
Yeah,
Merck.
well, you're an extremist if you say, well, maybe we should try peace.
Yes,
That's an
that's
extremist
an extreme
position.
position. And the irony of it all is that in Britain, Farage isn't even doing this. So Starmer came into this to Munich, alleging that reform is pro-Russian. Oh, Reform Party, that's just a pro-Russian party. They're not even remotely pro-Russian. And then he says, I am proud that my party fought for NATO's creation. And then he goes on about the foreign secretary. Ernie Bevin. And then he says, and crucially, coming to each other's aid under Article 5, we fought together in Afghanistan and so on. And so I say to all NATO members, our commitment to Article 5 is as profound now as ever. And be in no doubt, if called on, the UK would come to your aid today. And then he says, um,
I don't know about that. Okay. I think
I,
Article 5, they no, it's they worship at that altar. It's a false god. Sorry.
that's right. Yeah. Anyway, but it shows here where I want to talk about the and that is also why we are enhancing our nuclear cooperation with France. For decades, the UK has been the only nuclear power in Europe to commit its deterrent to protect all NATO members. But now any adversary must know that in a crisis, they could be confronted by our combined strength.
Oh,
One thing that one has to then point out that the way Starmer is talking, you can't have any more nuclear arms agreements without bringing in the British and the French nuclear weapons. There's no way. Where before he said, well, we only use it in the most extreme circumstances, when we are under attack. Now you're saying, oh, you're going to, use it here, there, and everywhere. Right. You're going to be
yeah.
taking part in any nuclear arms reduction talks.
Well, but he's going up the escalation ladder by saying that. Completely unnecessary,
Right.
completely. And George has mentioned this many times. I think he's just talking out of his sleeve here. For decades, the UK has been the only nuclear power in Europe to commit its deterrence to protect all NATO members. No, at the end of the day, who has the keys to the UK's nuclear arsenal? It's the
It's the
Americans.
Americans, exactly. There is no independent British nuclear deterrent. That never has been. It's always controlled by the Americans. So any attempt by the British to use nuclear weapons would be immediately vetoed by the United States.
Well, it's
Yeah, and then it says, and then so we must work harder to build a consensus and so on. It is striking that the different ends of the spectrum. Listen to this: the different ends of the spectrum share so much. Soft on Russia, weak on NATO, if not outright opposed, and determined to sacrifice the relationship we need on the altar of their ideology. What ideology? What's the
theology.
ideology? What's the ideology that links the parties on the right? Let's say the Reform Party. Leave aside Farage, but there might be people on the Reform Party who don't want to go to war with Russia. What ideology links them to Jeremy Corbyn? So I mean, Corbyn, yeah, Corbyn is, he doesn't think it's a great idea to go to war against Russia. So it says their ideology. What's the ideology?
And again, all the words I need to critique this paragraph are in the paragraph. On the altar of NATO. That's their ideological
Right. That's right.
totem, NATO.
That's right. Because when it comes to ideology, this is your ideology. This obsession with Russia, and you're essentially just mobilizing the resources of the continent. You're basically to go on fighting against Russia in perpetuity, without any. There's no plan here as to when does this end. He says no, it's never going to end. And we have this opposition from the left extremes of the left and right. And then, as with the case of Schmerz, you have to think, well, there's going to be a crackdown on these extremes. I mean, if they're standing in the way of this existential fight, there's going to have to be a crackdown. It's going to go just beyond Facebook posts. It's going to be, talking out of turn about NATO is soon going to be punishable.
It's George and I are quintessential children of the Cold War. And for the most part, that was ideological. We learned later that Brzezinski was just Russophobia. But having said that, isn't it interesting, George, if we distill 250, 300 years of European history, we always end up at the same place,
Right.
Russia.
Russia. Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yes, that's
Because the reason why I say that is because if you've imbibed this
right.
postmodernist neoliberal ideology, you wouldn't see that. Okay,
Mm,
but we know that that is a fraud. Mark Carney even told us it was.
right.
Okay, so because if you're brought up with NPR and CNN and Fox, you will never come to that conclusion. But if you look at the totality
Right.
and distill it down, one issue
Those
always
sources,
is
exactly.
always present. It's always present.
That's right. And it was very interesting. Like Merz now is using this word Russian imperialism. Oh, Russian imperialism. So before, your predecessors during the Cold War, they said, "Oh, it's all about Soviet communism. It's Soviet communism. It's this, it's the, we have to fight communism. We don't like communism." Um, the guy before that, he talked about Judeo-Bolshevism. So that was then Judeo-Bolshevik. We have to fight against Judeo-Bolshevism emanating from Russia. Then before that, it was back to Russian imperialism. It's very interesting. You keep calling it different things, but it's the same policy. It's just like,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
So now
yeah, yeah.
Schmerz has said it's Russian imperialism. Okay, it's not Judeo-Bolshevism. It's Russian imperialism.
Well, and also on the flip side is it doesn't really matter the regime type in Europe.
No, 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 no.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right.
No.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
You can have Imperial Germany, Weimar Germany, Nazi Germany, post-Nazi Germany, and you
Right.
still end up in the same place.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And the British, this happily brings up, late 19th century, where the British were absolutely totally obsessed with the threat from Russia, the threat to their empire. Well, you can't really say, well, we have an empire. There's no empire anymore. But it's not a threat to India anymore. Now they're a threat to us in the North Sea. Total, fantasy, but an amazing consistency.
Yep.
And then the future they offer is one of division and then capitulation. So this is Reform and Corbyn. This is the future they offer is one of division and then capitulation. Well,
Well,
the moment if you
yeah.
start talking along this line of capitulation, them's dangerous words. That's and then the lamps could go out across Europe once again. So this
Who
is
is he? Who is he stealing that
this
from?
is from this was from William Pitt at the time of Napoleon, after Napoleon, I think, won some great battle, and the lights are going out all over Europe, and that's when the lamps would go out all across Europe. Like, once again, you're right. That was where is he stealing this from? Yeah, it's William Pitt. The lamps would go out across Europe once again, but we will not let that
He
happen.
couldn't even. He couldn't even. Cite where he got the line from. This is how dishonest these people are.
That's right. But it's also, when you think of it, how portentous this is. I mean, this is a Munich Security Conference, and he's talking here that Napoleon, Napoleon, conquering Europe, the lamps going out across Europe. If we believe in our values, and we will not let that happen. So we got, if we believe in our values, in democracy, liberty, and the rule of law, this is the moment to stand up and to fight for them. That is why we must work together. So that's the Starmer's,
That was his
really,
shot at being Churchill, huh? That was
yeah,
his shot at.
Churchill, and then going back to William Pitt. Um, that is, as I was saying, it was kind of unhinged. I mean, I think this his speech in particular, but Macron also, but not to quite the same extent. His speech and Merz's speech is just simply unhinged. I mean, this is just mobilizing the continent for war. And what is so depressing is, where's the opposition to this? And it doesn't exist. And I think that's what's so dangerous of it. They don't care what the public thinks. They get good headlines in the media, the Telegraph, supposedly on the right. They don't like Starmer. Yeah, good speech. Good speech, Prime Minister. And then the Guardian. Oh, very good. Oh, that's it. That's all they need. Politico. Hey, we're getting ready to wage this war. For what? Our values and our democracy, whatever, none of which you actually even care about. You don't do anything to enhance those, but you're mobilizing the public for a war, and you can't even articulate what exactly is this war about.
That's why they've given up on the European project because it's failing. It's failed in many places for more and more people. And the way to maintain the status quo is to be on a permanent war effort and maybe even go to war.
Yeah, right. That's
Well,
right.
that's a real optimistic way of looking at things.
No,
You have to remember, everyone, what were first of all, it was Washington's behest, but why was there the European Economic Community that morphed into
good.
the E? What was the
Right.
normative narrative?
Yeah.
So, for peace and prosperity. The peace, prosperity, those are good things to talk about.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I see just misery ahead for the
Right.
people of Europe.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. No, exactly. And there's nothing. They offer nothing but misery. Um, and that's really the plan. And that's what is so striking about all of these conferences, all the Davos and everything else is they openly offer nothing but misery. So, we used to have a Davos, and it's still part of their agenda, which is, well, we have to cut back on our way of life. We got to start getting used to eating bugs and everything else because of the threat to our environment. Then, where we got to really get ready for permanent war. So forget about enjoying the good things of life. Everything has to be spent on the military. So that's really the plan. They get together to eat sumptuous meals and then tell the public, you're going to have a very miserable time of it in the coming decades. So get used to it. And then we're heading to the next conference.
It's really interesting. Something that it's very important to the both of us here is how we have this meta narrative about the coming of the Second World War, and we have all of these characters, I mean, and really low octane thinkers,
Right,
seriously,
right,
in Munich, and they're playing their role in
right,
that psychodrama.
right, right.
Okay. Because what they look for, there's still things that very simple. Okay, the Nazis were the bad guys.
Yeah,
Now that's the Russians. It's very, very simple because you even see it in their language. They crib from
mhm, right,
figures from the 1920s and the 1930s. They crib it. They don't tell you where they got it from,
right.
and it's part of that meta
Yeah,
narrative. There is George and I, and we'll never get tired of saying it. I don't care how many times we have to repeat it. Where is the peace agenda?
hmm,
Where is the countervailing view? This is completely absent. That wasn't absent in the 20s and the 30s,
right.
okay? There was a very, very vigorous debate about European security or the lack thereof.
The 1920s. You talk about the 1920s. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's right. Because at the time, the leaders of Europe spent their time figuring out how they can abolish war once and for all. I mean, that was they devoted themselves to that task. And remember, that principle, the Locarno Treaty, was exactly enhancing that point, which is when you issue security guarantees, you have to issue security guarantees to both sides. Because if you do it to just one side, that's no security. So that's what they did at Locarno, and then we had the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was again to abolish war. No one will ever pursue war. And then you had the League of Nations. So yeah, they were really working hard to create the conditions where there would never be war again. And now on the contrary, hey, we want a war. We get it off the ground before the end of the decade. So it used to be in 2030. Now, hey, we brought it forward by a couple of years. So It's going to happen sometime very soon.
Yeah, but the same guy now is good-willed as they were, and it's worth studying.
Right.
But as long as the Soviet Union was kept in on the periphery or out of negotiations, this you create a unstable security environment. Okay, and then it was no wonder that Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union in the 1920s, Weimar Germany in the 1920s, and the Soviet Union found common cause. Now, it's a very varied story as the time went on. But if you're, my point is, and I think it's George's point too, as long as you exclude and target someone as an enemy, you're going to have instability because
You,
the targeted one is always going to be reacting to it.
that's right. Exactly. You're guaranteeing instability. Everything that was said by these speeches is saying, okay, that is a guarantee for permanent war. And, Starmer really doesn't even bother hiding it. He said, okay, well, now, any Russian leader, forget Putin, whoever comes out, somebody's going to replace Putin. It's going to happen, in a not too distant future. It's inevitable. He's going to take exactly the same view. Hey, these people mean to wage war against us, and it's going to be a permanent thing. We have to take measures to anticipate this, and that's inevitable. And then you have to say, well, what is it that von der Leyen and Merz and Starmer want? That's essentially what they want. That guarantees their remaining in power, or people like them remaining in power in perpetuity, and enables them to suppress all dissent, all populist political parties. Hey, there's a war on. You can't have people expressing their views, posting whatever they feel like posting.
Yeah, just to end up, it was I read it. I'm getting conjuring up from memory, but of underlined saying that Ukraine is European, which is really, when I read it, I thought that's curious
Right,
because Europe is becoming like Ukraine.
right, right,
Ukraine bans political opposition.
right,
The Ukrainian authorities have almost complete information control.
right,
Okay. It's very interesting. It's Europe that is becoming like Ukraine.
right, right,
All right.
right.
And what we're seeing right now, if we see this as a trend, and George and I certainly do, that this is the blueprint for the next 10 years, 20 years.
Right.
Okay. They've abandoned the original project. Now they're crafting it for something very, very different. And George is right. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if von der Leyen gets another term and then another term.
That's right. It's because
I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised either.
Only under this woman, we've seen this kind of assertiveness and grabbing of power towards herself, her
Right,
person,
right,
and her so-called office here. These are all trends, and
right,
start
right,
connecting dots.
right,
Okay.
right,
Oh, they're just angry at Trump and they're trying to be assertive and they
right,
want to be grown-ups like everyone. No, I think this is something far, far insidious and far more serious.
right, right, right. I should just say, as we're finishing up, that I think that phrase, "the lights are going out in Europe," I think that's from Sir Edward Grey, before World War One. I think that was when he said it.
I didn't want to correct
No, I
you.
know. You see, the reason I said Pitt, because William Pitt was another famous expression of his, which was roll up that map of Europe. We shan't be needing it for I don't know how many years. And that's why I got kind of a little confused that it was about William
Well,
Pitt. But Pitt
uh,
is the roll up that map of Europe. Sir Edward Grey, the lights are going out all over
well,
Europe.
he said the lights are going out all across Europe, and I fear we will never see them lit again. That's my best
Right.
paraphrasing
I
of.
think there was something like that. It was yeah. It was Sir Edward Grey, but it was just because these I had these two expressions very similar in mind. But yeah, Pitt was the one with the roll up that map of Europe, and yeah, the lights are going out all over Europe. That was Sir Edward Grey.
Yeah, but the lights are going out all
They
across
are
the.
going up. But so I wanted to correct that because I know people are gonna, say, no, no, that wasn't it. But yeah,
Well, my over the last 12 months, my eyesight has been slightly impaired, but I know exactly the book I was going to check after
right. No,
this.
that's right. I was, and when I said it, I think I kept thinking about, that I'm not, I don't think that's right, and but to correct that. So that's the so Edward Grey, the lights are going out all over Europe. William Pitt, roll up that map of Europe. They're similar circumstances, but a little bit different.
Well, I think maybe George and I will put some extra time and effort to it. But I really would like to do a podcast. What is Europe? I
Okay.
think that's an interesting because we roll up that map. See, there's so many different things. Okay, and we will not be referring to Timothy Gardnash, who thinks himself as Mr. Europe.
Mr.
Okay.
Europe, exactly. And give me another prize, please. So Timothy Gardner, his existence is made up of prizes. Oh, let me see. Whom can we give a prize to? Oh, Timothy Gardner for services rendered to Europe, liberalism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, he's going to probably get the thank you for keeping the pitchforks at bay. Okay, so all right, everybody. We live in very bad times.
Right.
The mainstream media, they always look for, if it's, what did they say about Trump, blah, blah, and then, Navalny and all that.
Right.
Most of the media is going to miss entirely
Right.
what George and I just talked about here,
Exactly.
which
Exactly.
is far more important.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So,
Right. Exactly.
all righty. This is Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on Locals, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. I know, buddy. I know. Okay. This is our ending of our Sunday blowout as usual. That's as many slides as I anticipated. George never tells me in advance. Never. Okay. He always wants to surprise me. But because of what I call Star Trek technology, George and I will have our live stream tomorrow at 10 o'clock Eastern time.
That's right. And then Buddy said, "Yeah, I was going to bring up the Sir Edward Grey thing, and then but it was
I
stole my
was
thunder."
wondering what the scratches on my leg were.
Exactly. Hey, that's Sir Edward Grey. But that only enhances Buddy and Apple's point. You need to put more into the tip jar. That's the only solution. So if you have any money lying around, anything that you're not using, straight into the tip jar. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology. And then maybe the dogs will stop scratching all the time. They'll be just, keep them a little bit calmer and in a better frame of mind. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.